Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator. A nearly 20-year veteran at Google, Ted Souder serves as head of industry retail. In this role, he oversees the development and transition of digital marketing strategies for some of the world's largest retailers using various Google tools and platforms. In addition to his role as programs chair of the club, Ted is the vice chairman of the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce and is a board member at 1871. Ted has graciously agreed to moderate today's conversation. So Ted, I turn things over to you.
Thanks, David. And I'm definitely looking forward to today's conversation. So thanks to everyone for coming. First off, I have to say, as a United Million Mile Flyer and a 1K customer, it's a real honor for me to be able to introduce Scott Kirby to you all. When it was announced that Scott would be the next CEO of United Airlines in December of 2019, doctors halfway around the world were observing the first symptoms of COVID-19 in patient zero. By the time he took the helm in May of last year, he faced the daunting task of leading a major US airline through a global pandemic. Can you imagine? Well, fortunately for United and us, Scott Kirby is no stranger to a challenge. He previously served as the president of US Airways, American Airlines, and United. And for 3 decades, he's faced the daily complexities unique to an industry that touches international law, domestic regulations, and public safety. Scott, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Ted, and thanks for saying something about your flying. We look forward to getting you and everyone else back on the road again.
I'm on board. I can't wait. So I want to start off by saying, not many of our members may be acquainted with your journey to the role of CEO at United. So I wanted to go back to the very beginning. You grew up as the oldest of 6 siblings, and you once had aspirations of becoming a professional athlete. And we definitely would love to hear about that. How did your early life shape your decision to ultimately attend the United States Air Force Academy and work with aircraft?
Yeah, so I did want to be a professional athlete. I can remember the moment when I realized it wasn't going to happen, which was a sad moment in my life when I was in about 7th grade. But I also was always fascinated with aviation, and in particular with World War II. I had read every single book in my small town library on World War II that they had in the Dewey Decimal System by the time I was in 9th grade. So decided I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy and become a pilot. I had aspirations to be a fighter pilot, but while at the Academy, realized that was not likely to happen, and so instead did not go to pilot training. And went to work at the Pentagon, where I was an economist of all things, and one of the most fascinating jobs a 21-year-old could ever have. And then I just kind of got into aviation by accident, back into aviation, and it gets in your blood. And I spent the rest of my career in aviation, starting at American Airlines and then to smaller airlines, America West, and then kind of worked my way back up to big airlines. So it's been a fascinating and fun career all along the way.
Well, I'm sorry the professional athlete aspirations didn't work out. Obviously, you've had a storied and amazing career. But I do want to ask you, because I do know that you are an athlete and you do have lead a healthy lifestyle. Do you think being an athlete and having a focus on health makes you a better leader? And the reason I ask that is because 1.5 years ago, we had another economic club dinner with David Cordani, who's the CEO of Cigna. And I asked him the same question. He said, absolutely, that has an impact. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's tons of scientific evidence that leading a healthy lifestyle, staying fit, exercising, getting a lot of sleep, something most people don't do. I actually sleep about 8.5 hours a night, every night, it not only makes you healthier, makes you feel better. I think you accomplish a lot more. You're just so much sharper. I can tell the difference in myself. If I don't get a good night's sleep when I'm traveling or something, my brain is not functioning at 100%. And leading a healthy lifestyle and exercising and staying fit just makes everything in life better, I think. I totally agree with him.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great feedback, and I think something we can all really learn from. And so like last May, when you became CEO of United, obviously it was an unprecedented time in our history. What sort of principles and values and lessons from your long career and all of the things you have experienced have helped framed how you're leading United through the pandemic?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've taken to saying a lot, I said before, but kind of our guiding North Star as we've gone through this has been just do the right thing. in a world where there's so much uncertainty that we have had to deal with. If you just focus on what seems like the right thing to do, that allowed us early in the crisis, just as an example, to be the first airline to require masks on board. And it was controversial when we did it. We took a fair bit of heat, but within a few weeks, kind of the whole world had migrated to requiring masks on board. And making principled decisions, getting rid of change fees, which is something that my whole airline career I had wanted to do at the various airlines I've been at for our customers. This is another one of those that just fits in with doing the right thing and trying to get our frontline employees oriented around that simple message of, we just want you to do the right thing. Forget about the huge rule book. There's some regulatory safety issues that we have to always follow, but outside of that, just try to do the right thing for each other and for our customers. So as much as anything, that seemingly simple phrase can lead you to the right decision almost all the time, I think.
So let's build on that for a second, because recently you said aggressively managing the challenges of 2020 depended on our innovation and fast-paced decision-making. But the truth is that COVID-19 has changed United Airlines forever. Now, many smart CEOs, including probably many who are on our call today, have used this as an opportunity to tighten and focus their strategy. Tell us about the sort of innovations and other big decisions that you've made over the past year that has truly changed United forever.
Well, I'll start with some of the tactical things that we've done, but then I'll end with what I think is the most important, which is a cultural change. But from a tactical perspective, again, we've led on safety, health initiatives throughout the crisis. And I think that much of that is going to remain with us even after this is over. We've, of course, done a lot in the business to change the cost structure, to get more efficient. All of that is going to stay here. We've made huge strides in changing the experience for customers. Our Net Promoter Scores are up almost 40 points on a year-over-year basis, just an unbelievable amount. Our employee satisfaction scores, similarly, just off the charts good, which is remarkable given the stress, the strain, the uncertainty, the challenges that we've been going through to see those kinds of numbers. And part of that, I think, by the way, is our employees, back in March and April when they were flying airplanes with 4 or 5 customers, I think it emphasized to everyone in a very stark terms the importance of the customer and who actually pays all of our salaries. And I don't want to say that we took them for granted or that anyone took our customers for granted, but there probably was a little bit of that. And when you fly an airplane around with only 4 or 5 people on it, it really brings home the importance of trying to do the right thing to have customers want to fly United, choose to fly United. We've taken to saying our goal is to get customers to like us. I hope we can eventually transition that into loving us. But for an airline, if we can get customers to like us, I think that'll be important. On more recently, United has a travel ready center, and this is going to continue to evolve, where we're using artificial intelligence to check documents because the rules are changing everywhere in the country. And you can go on to United and you can take pictures of your documents, upload your documents. We can tell you if you're good to go to Brazil, if you're good to go here, if you're good to go there. We're helping people get testing kits as testing requirements become more. We're working on vaccine passports. But culturally, the biggest change is to try to be more like your company, to be entrepreneurial, to be fast-paced, to experiment, to try things. And for a big company like United, that's a really hard cultural change to make. It's easy to say, but it's a lot harder to actually do it than it is to just talk about doing it. But we've worked hard to do that. We've been successful during the pandemic. The key will be when you don't have the stress of the pandemic forcing the change, can we keep doing it even in a normal environment?
Maybe it's an example of how, for the first time in history, everybody around the globe is being impacted by the same thing at the same time. So maybe it's easier for everybody to kind of come together and get organized behind one mission. And I think that's probably what your employees are doing, and also hopefully the public. So I think on the other side of the business, back in November it was announced that United was working with the federal government and certain private partners on the initial COVID-19 vaccine distribution and rollout phase, which has almost been like a wartime effort. What sort of challenges have you seen during this, and how has United been able to overcome that?
Yeah, no, well, it's another example, I think, of United being entrepreneurial, having a changed culture as we've gone through this, that we started off going heavy into flying cargo and last quarter, our cargo revenues were up 77%. Our passenger revenues, sadly, were down 70%. But going where the opportunities were, and because we thought all the way back in April that COVID was likely going to extend well into 2021, we started making longer-term planning decisions, including working with the FAA on the structural changes and the process changes that would allow us to carry, an airplane full of cold chain vaccines. To carry enough dry ice to fill an airplane with dry ice is essentially what it was, and that's something that airlines weren't allowed to do before. And to the best of my knowledge, we're the only passenger airline in the world that did that. But it's because we started back in May, and so by November, when vaccines were ready to be distributed, we were the only ones that had done all the upfront work to be prepared for that, and we were honored to play a small role, an important role, but a small role in the distribution of the vaccine with the pharmaceutical partners.
Well, I'm sure that's something that you and your employees, I'm sure, are super proud of. You're carrying this precious cargo, and cargo is such an important part of the business. I love hearing 77% growth. That's always a good thing. Do you, looking forward for the cargo piece of it, do you see an eventual end date for this vaccine cargo program, or is this now more of an evergreen part of your cargo business where you'll be doing this for years to come?
My guess is we'll carry cargo. We'll carry vaccines for years to come, because I suspect that we're not going to get permanent immunity from vaccines, and that we're going to have annual or biannual boosters. So that part will be. But the big cargo push that we've had that led to 77% growth is likely to reverse. And the reason is because more than half of cargo, international cargo, pre-pandemic flew in the belly of passenger airplanes. But when the borders were closed, the passenger airplanes basically shut down. So you had a over 50% reduction in supply, in the amount of space available for cargo. At the same time, you had an increase in demand because you were carrying personal protective equipment, and as supply chains got closed, things that used to travel on ships traveled on air, and now vaccines. So you've had an increase in demand with a 50% reduction in supply. Economics 101, that's right. The prices have gone up. And that will likely revert once we get back to normal and the passenger airlines are flying again. And we'll go back to our airplanes being principally for carrying passengers around. And while cargo will then fall back, we'll be really glad to have our customers and our passengers back, because that's really what pays the way at a passenger airline.
For sure. So let me ask you this: as the leader of our hometown airline, which we're all so proud of, and also the creator of lots of jobs, how do you think the current financial crisis is going to impact the super important and frankly much needed O'Hare expansion project?
Well, first, thanks for saying hometown airline. We are the hometown airline. We think of ourselves that way. I know we have competitors there, but we're by far the largest and the ones that have our headquarters there. And look, we're important. I think everyone in this group knows it, but we're important not just for being a large company headquartered in Chicago, but the McCormick Center, and the millions of people that will someday be coming back to conventions there, and all the jobs they support in the tourism sector, the hospitality sector. We're incredibly important cog, really an enabler of all of those jobs. And the reality is that while the pandemic has been terrible for the short term, it doesn't change anything about the long term, and where we think we're going to be at the time that the incremental gates and the changes are going to happen at O'Hare. So we and the city of Chicago remain fully supportive of the modernization project, and it's actually ongoing. One of the runways just closed yesterday, actually, for lengthening 9 right, and 9 center is now open for that project as the work continues. So we look forward to getting all that done, and continuing to grow along with the city and the economy of Chicago.
Well, it's great to hear that we want to continue pushing forward. And also, of course, both domestic and international travel is going to come back. And the amount of time it takes to expand and build an airport, I mean, we're talking, 8-10 years. I think the more that we can plan for the future, the better. Yeah. And look at what they've done with LaGuardia or LAX or Chenji and Singapore. It's almost like an airport as a destination in and of itself. So I think Chicago deserves that. So we're looking forward to that happening for sure.
Well, and you look, it really is important. It's such an enabler in today's economy to be global, to be able to get to all points around the globe. And having a big hub airline like United, there, it's not just about the headquarters, is critical to being able to access those points. And when businesses are deciding where to locate or where to have a convention, having the nonstop service to the most destinations, is a critical enabler. And some of those cities, take a Singapore, that's really the bedrock on that modern economy has been built on. The same can be true here in the United States as well.
I agree with that. So, Scott, recently you mentioned on CNBC that you see huge pent-up demand for travel. And I totally agree with that. And interestingly enough, my wife has a safari business, and she's seen an uptick in interest for people who want to go to East Africa on safari and finally just get out of their house.
Yeah.
What segments do you believe will return first as people start to travel again?
Yeah. So first, I'll say my opinion has been in the minority, believing that travel would return and return in force. Although more and more people like you, Ted, are starting to say the same thing. Our guess is that we're going to have to hit an inflection point in vaccines. And I've been telling our employees, at the point that we can go out into Chicago and go to a restaurant and be at 100% capacity, or we go to New York, go to San Francisco, and be at 100% capacity in restaurants, or go to Disneyland, or go to a Broadway show, that's probably where the inflection point happens, where demand recovers. And before then, it's going to be depressed. But when that happens, I think there's huge pent-up demand of people wanting to travel, first for leisure, that people that have been locked at home for a long period of time, I think are going to be anxious to get out. We have lots of data, survey data, bookings data, the kind of stuff that your wife is looking at to demonstrate that that's true. And I suspect most people on this call would agree with that. The sort of working theory from most is that travel will be domestic. My guess actually is that once the borders are open, at least, that travel will be international. And I've been saying, a little tongue in cheek, if you've been on lockdown for 18 to 24 months and your choice is to go visit the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, nothing against it, by the way, it's great. Or you can go to Paris. I'm betting on Paris, that more people are going to want to go to Paris. And look, the other thing that's happened is there's been a big shift in spending. While travel dollars are down 70%, home repairs and cars and things like that are up pretty significantly. So that's been pulled forward, I think. And I think there's going to be far more disposable income available for travel and leisure when this is over than there was before. And on business travel, I think that takes a little longer to recover because it's more of a budget issue. But we're social creatures, and this is great, but it is not the same as being there in Chicago in person, networking with people when the event is over. That's where the real human connections, the connections you didn't even know you were missing, are made. And without that, business is not going to be the same. And I've been saying to people, as good a substitute as Zoom is, the first time you lose a sale to someone who showed up in person and you tried a Zoom call is the last time you try a sales Zoom. So I think business travel and leisure travel are going to all recover within a couple of years of hitting that inflection point.
So it was interesting. Earlier you said that people have a pent-up demand for sure. Maybe certain sectors might have the ability to travel more than others. But one area we've seen real growth in is around private travel experiences, whether it's Triumph Jets based here in Chicago or exclusive resorts in Denver. Their businesses are doing really, really well today. Do you see that trend continuing on the private front, or is this more of just a way for people to feel safe being with their own group, their own family, as opposed to on a 777, for example?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps it will. I'm not sure how sustainable that trend will be when there's another alternative of flying on commercial airlines for a fraction of the price. But whether it does or doesn't, it's a tiny number of people that are flying on private jets compared to the number of people that were flying on commercial airlines. I mean, look, it's tiny even today. And when we get back to normal, it will be again be a very small part of the air service chain, just because it's so much more expensive. And particularly, if you're flying long haul international, in a lot of places, at least I think, the experience of flying in a Polaris seat on United is at least comparable, if not better, than flying on a private jet,
Sure.
on a long haul international flight. So I don't think it'll really impact our business much one way or another.
And love the Polaris product. How has the change in flight patterns and hardware impacted the rollout of your Polaris program?
So one of the things that we've done, we started this back in September, is actually double down on accelerating getting the Polaris product on board. We've got airplanes that are down anyway. It costs about $10 million per airplane, by the way, to install Polaris. So it's a big money. But we were gonna, it's just a matter of timing. So now that we have aircraft down and we have the opportunity, we've raised enough liquidity to get through the crisis. We've actually accelerated the investment in Polaris to attempt to get it done even faster, because it's really popular with our customers. And we have a conviction, we're pretty unique in this. We're the only airline, large airline, really in the world outside of China, that hasn't retired a large number of our international aircraft, because there's been this view that international is never going to come back. We disagree, and haven't retired any of our aircraft, and in fact are uniquely doubling down on making the investments so that when customers are ready to come back and travel internationally, they have the best product, and we have the full fleet available to take them around the globe.
So love to hear that, because it is a great product, and I've been lucky to sit in Polaris, the Polaris product, a number of times, and I think that it'll probably be more popular than ever in the fact that it's a little more private. So that's going to be exciting. But tell us, over the next year or two, what does air travel look like for the public as they go out and about? Will we be seeing extended mask mandates? Will we eventually have a health passport that some people have been talking about? And then second part of the question is, what does the future of travel look like 20 or 30 years from now? Is it going to be space-based? As I mentioned to you the other day, there's some great startups working on bringing back supersonic travel. So what is it for the next year or two? And then where are we headed 20, 30 years from now?
So for the next period of time, until we hit that inflection point in demand, where there's a critical mass of vaccines and the world is back to feeling sort of like it did in the pre-pandemic, we can have a debate about how long that takes. But between now and then, I think absolutely safety and health are going to be at the very top of the list. And so you'll continue to see masks mandated, certainly on United. But my guess is now with the federal government has mandated it. And so you'll see that those kinds of things continue. At United, you'll see us continue to do things that uniquely United is doing. Like, one of the remarkable things that very few people know is that an airplane is, if you're going to be anywhere around other people, an airplane is literally the place you can be. And it's mostly because of the air filtration and the airflow in the system, where the air is being recycled literally every 2 to 3 minutes, 50% through HEPA grade filters and the other 50% fresh from outside. I mean, even in a hospital ICU where they have HEPA grade filters, it's being recycled every 20 to 30 minutes. That's why the study we did with the Defense Department, essentially concluded it's almost impossible to get COVID on an airplane. But United is doing things like, we're the only airline that's doing this, sadly, but we run our auxiliary power before any customers get on board the airplane. Because if you don't have that robust airflow on an airplane, you're close to others, it becomes a situation like being in a building. So we do that uniquely. You'll see that kind of stuff continuing. I do hope, at least, that we will migrate to a world with vaccine passports. And we've been, setting up for this for months. Part of our Travel Ready Center is to be ready for vaccines or testing. But I think it's a key to opening up not just international borders, aviation, but the economy. And my vision of it would be, once you get a vaccine passport that the government says this is okay for going across an international border. We've already worked on the apps with partners, so we'd have that available. But our local restaurants could use it. You come in and show your QR code, and that's how they go to 100%. Or if you want to go to a Bulls game, the way you go to the Bulls game is you show, I've got the vaccine. And by the way, that opens up large parts of the economy. It also starts to overcome vaccine hesitancy. Because if I want to go to Bulls games, if I want to go to restaurants, I kind of have to get the vaccine. And so whether you mandate it or not, it gives people a pretty strong incentive, because that's the way they can get their lives back to normal. So we're going to need government regulatory support to enact kind of the rules of the road for that. And we're spending a lot of time talking to the administration and international jurisdictions about that. But we absolutely think that a key to reopening the parts of the economy that have been closed are some form of vaccine passports.
And what about 20 years from now, 30 years from now?
20 years from now. So
is it crazy jet age, or is it just more of the same?
I think there will be differences. One, I think the customer experience will be far, far better. We're already starting to experiment with like even using artificial intelligence, trying to tell people what's going on, trying to get better. The storm in Chicago the last few days. We've got some new policies. We contacted a huge percentage of our customers and got them options to move either a day before the storm or a day after the storm started. And simple things like helping them facilitate getting them hotels if an airport closes. And so the experience, I think, will be better. One big difference will be also, I think, the importance of carbon or climate change. And we can talk about that separately, but climate change in aviation and what that means and what customers think about when they're choosing an airline to fly. But in terms of will there be a huge technological change, my guess is there probably won't be. Space is really hard and really, really expensive. And supersonic aircraft are not only really expensive and not only pretty high carbon, you got to overcome the problem of the sonic boom. And that's one that hasn't been overcome yet. And so those things are going to make it hard for structural changes. And similarly, I don't think that we're going to have electric or hydropower airplanes, at least not flying long haul, perhaps short haul, but not long haul because the energy density is simply not high enough for either electric or for hydrogen to ever power a large airplane with a lot of people for a very long distance.
So let's build on that for a second, because you did recently announce the Green 2050 initiative to become 100% green and carbon neutral by 2050. Obviously, a hugely important initiative, but also one being launched at a challenging time, not only for the company but for the world. Tell us more about the Green 2050 initiative and what role will United play in that as leaders in the space?
So this is an initiative that I feel very personally about and I've been passionate about since I was in college. And even back, certainly by the 90s, it was obvious that climate change was real. It's taken a long time for some, I suppose, to accept that, but there's broad acceptance now that climate change is real and that we have to address it and that we need to do something about it. I've also been frustrated over the years that we, as a society, even those of us that want to address climate change, are unwilling to be honest about the scope of the problem, and the remediation that is going to be required. And so what United did was our 100% green commitment is unique. I'm not aware of any other airline or company that has done it. And the difference is what we've said, we're going to get there without using traditional carbon offsets. And traditional carbon offsets, many people on this call probably are places where you use them, is you pay somebody, the Conservancy Fund or someone to offset your carbon emissions. And typically what they do is they say they're going to planting trees or agreeing not to cut down trees is the most common. And if you research those, many of them actually are trees that were never going to be cut down anyway. So that doesn't really change the answer. But even if it did, look, the reality is we produce 4,000 times as many emissions in the industry as we did pre-industrial era. We cannot plant 4,000 times as many trees. There's not space on the planet. And we're going to continue to burn carbon. We can't get all the way to zero anytime in the foreseeable future, and we can talk about why. Which gets to the answer, the only way I think that the math works, if you just do the math, the only way it works is if you are sequestering carbon underground. And so United's 100% green commitment started as an investor in the world's largest first kind of full-scale demonstration project for direct air capture and sequestering carbon. So taking carbon out of the atmosphere, pumping it underground where it will be permanently stored underground. And I think that is the key to the world and our society actually addressing and dealing with carbon. So we were honored to be partners with Occidental and 1.5 in that project, but it really is unique because we're eliminating and getting to 100% green, not by using traditional carbon offsets, but by truly sequestering carbon permanently underground.
I love to hear that, and it's great that you are taking the lead on that. I talk to friends and business partners in Europe, for example, and this is very much top of mind for them, that they really question the need to fly as much as they may have in the past just because of the environmental impact. So I think that that's absolutely crucial for America. So I just one final question, And this is something that I know that you've been working on literally this week and last week. You said that United Airlines may make the COVID-19 vaccine mandatory for employees, and other companies should do the same. And I know that you were recently speaking to the Business Roundtable about this. Here we are on a call, lucky to be with 700 business leaders and owners in Chicago. How's this going? What's the response been from your peers?
Yeah.
And what do you want to say to the Chicago leadership?
Yeah. So, well, thanks for the opportunity to say it, because I think this really is important. And it started with, I was on an employee town hall, and we've made a habit as we've gone through the crisis, even before, but certainly as we've gone through, being very open, honest, direct, and transparent. It's a big question with our employees. And so I got asked, and what I said is, at United, safety has been number one, always is at an airline, but number one for us throughout. It's the reason we were the first airline and among the first large brand and company that I know of. There may have been others, but to require masks on board, even when it was controversial, because again, it was the right thing to do. And the worst thing that I have done in my time as CEO, and I believe the worst thing I will ever do in my time as CEO, is I've handwritten letters to the families of every employee that we have lost to coronavirus. And that's an awful thing to do. And when you've done that, it also puts it in a different perspective. I bet almost everyone on this call, every CEO on this call, is planning to get the coronavirus vaccine themselves. We all know it's the right thing to do. And yes, there's some questions. It's an emergency use authorization. It hasn't been here for 10 years. But we know that the balance of equities, we are safer getting the vaccine than not getting the vaccine. And in a world where we have employees that interact with each other and interact with our customers, we have an obligation to everyone involved, not just to the individual that decides they want or don't want the vaccine, but to all the people that they interact with. And so what I said to our employees is, I think the right thing to do, without question, is to make the vaccine mandatory. But there's two preconditions that have to happen before we can do that. One is we have to have the logistics worked out. We have to be able to make the vaccine available to them before we can make it mandatory. And two, I'm realistic enough, well, I think it's the right thing to do, to know that United Airlines alone can't do it and have it stick and have it and be able to make that effective. There have to be others. There doesn't have to be a ton of others, but there have to be others. And what I hope is that there are a coalition of like-minded companies that will do the same thing. And I think if that does happen, it will just get the ball rolling. And then a lot of others, and I've talked to a lot of people one-on-one, I think there's a very big second wave of companies that would like to make the vaccine mandatory, but they're a little bit afraid to be in that first wave. What I've been saying to them all is, look, I think it's a matter of leadership. And those of us that are corporate leaders, it's easy to be a leader when everyone agrees with you. Leadership is really about doing the right thing, even when it's tough and even when there are people that do disagree with you. But I think if we can get enough people to make it mandatory, it will become just like masks. The first few companies that required masks took a little bit of heat, and it was a little hard, but it paved the way for everyone else to come along. And so I'm hopeful as a society that's what we'll do. And look, one of the other things I would say is that's important is one of the most frustrating things about allowing the cases to escalate to 200,000 to 300,000 per day all along has been not just the deaths that it caused, but we have given the virus a huge playing field on which to mutate. And our biggest long-term risk is that it becomes more deadly, more transmissible, evades the vaccines. And it's time for us to shrink the playing field for COVID to mutate.
Well, thank you for your inspiring words. I think it's something that we all really can, and something that we can all really take away and hopefully bring to our own businesses and our own lives, because it's definitely important. So, Scott, thank you so much for your time and insights. Fascinating discussion. And I also want to just say on behalf of everyone, thanks for all you and your 88,000 employees, all they do to unite the world by connecting people to the moments that matter the most. So, David,
thank you for using that. Thank you, and thank you for saying that about them.
Thank you, Ted. And we'll throw things over to audience questions. And I have two very similar, one from member Kevin Rockford, another from member Lauren Thoriel. Yes, there's one theory that air travel will bounce back, specifically consumer travel. But another line of thinking that there's a structural change, especially in business travel, that it may never come back or not in the foreseeable future come back to levels prior to COVID. So they're wondering whether United has a plan B in the event that there is this structural change. And Lauren specifically asked whether you're considering a retry at some of the flanker low-cost airlines that might help ease some of the decline in travel.
First, I think actually the dominant view, the consensus view, is that air travel is never going to come back. If you survey companies, if you listen to Bill Gates, who's a genius, by the way, but I'm not sure he is the expert on commercial air travel at his point in life. But if you listen to the consensus view, it's that business travel is not coming back. I think it's inconsistent with human nature. So my perspective is mostly based on human nature. People said this 20 years ago when video conferencing first came to be, and it didn't happen. I know that all of us have done these Zoom calls. They are not the same as being there in person. I wish I could meet the two people that asked the question at a luncheon or a happy hour later tonight, and the relationships and the conversations would be so much better. As a species, we're a social species, and we are relationship driven, and you just can't build those relationships online like this. It's one thing to have long-term relationships, but even those start to fray. I can feel it with my own team. We spend a ton of time together online, but it's not the same as being there in person. And we're doing more to try to get together in person. So I do think business travel will come back. As for Plan B, we got a lot of flexibility in the fleet. We could make changes. It'd be hard. We could make changes. We're certainly not planning for that, or at least we're not building towards that. And I doubt we're ever going to go back to a subsidiary. Ted, it was great, and thank you, Ted, for the interview questions. If anyone noticed in his background, he has a picture of an airplane. It's called Ted. That was United years ago, low-cost carrier subsidiary. I doubt we're going back to something like that. In fact, we're trying to improve the customer experience.
So swinging back to your comments about making vaccines mandatory for your employees, does that include unionized employees, and does it involve any bargaining with United's unions in order to implement an all-vaccine policy?
It would include those employees. And by the way, we would have religious and medical exemptions for that. But it does not require bargaining for things like that. For health safety initiatives, that's something we can do. And look, this is not uncommon. It's become an issue here in the United States today, but there's vaccine requirements to fly to countries around the world. I'm pretty sure when I went to school, I had to have vaccines, certain vaccines, before I was allowed into the public school system. And lots of hospitals require influenza vaccines every year. So this is not treading new ground or something that's uncommon. Sadly, the COVID crisis, in a way, has been politicized. And I wish we could all just let science and data and rational thought guide our answers. Because if you do that, the answers become reasonably straightforward.
Just a quick follow-up from member Lori Holmes. What are the implications for employees who refuse to take the vaccine if it's not for a religious or health exemption?
Well, we would try, where possible, to give them jobs that didn't require them to interact with customers or with other employees. But the truth is there's a limited number of jobs that fit that category. My guess is, much like masks, the vast majority of employees will wear masks. I think we've terminated 2 employees over mask requirements. But much like the vaccines, we had the same questions, the same big push for you can't require me to wear a mask, you shouldn't require me to wear a mask. And it's now a non-issue. I think the same thing will happen with vaccines and making them mandatory. It will just become what is expected and what most companies do. Once the ball gets rolling, it's going to roll all the way to the bottom.
So airlines, obviously including United, have taken exhaustive efforts to make the aircraft themselves safe for passengers. But as we all know, in order to get on an aircraft, we have to go through an airport. And we all saw photos during the holiday or video of passengers over the holidays just crowding airports like O'Hare. So how important will it be for travelers to have confidence in the airport experience? And as an airline, what kind of leverage do you have in order to force or strongly encourage the TSA or airport operators to make their facilities safer and restore public confidence in them?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that we've been focused on. One of the things we really like about the federal mask mandate it includes airports now. So it gives the airports the enforcement authority to mandate masks in airports, which will help. At United, we'd taken a number of steps even before that, including in our areas of the airport that we control, applying exactly the same rules about masks that we apply on board. We'd also done things at airports where we could control the concession areas to reduce the amount of seating by up to 75%, because those are areas where you can see a lot of people sitting around eating without masks, obviously, because they're eating. So those are two examples. One of the other things that's little known about airports is years ago, the certification requirements changed to have airports, required airports to have what's called MERV 13. Many of you may now know what MERV is. I didn't before this. MERV 17 is HEPA grade filters that are in ICU or on our airplanes. But most buildings are MERV 4 or 5. But most airports, including I'm almost certain O'Hare, are MERV 13. So at least the filtration is better. But I think the biggest thing going forward is the government willing to, at a federal level, now be able to step up and enforce the mask requirements in particular is going to help even more with safety.
Sure. Overall, do you think airports are doing enough?
Some are doing a great job, and there's some that I wish would do more. We work behind the scenes with those that we wish would do more. But for the most part, I think airports at least want to do a good job. In some cases, they didn't feel like they had the legal empowerment to enforce rules. And with this federal mandate, what that does is it kind of eliminates that concern and lets them all focus on enforcement. So I think it'll, by and large, be a better experience now because the federal government has endorsed it.
Great. Speaking of airports, Ted earlier alluded to the O'Hare expansion. You expressed your full support for the expansion, but given the trauma that's happening in the airline industry now, do you see the pace of the expansion staying on track? As you know, airline expansions are funded by landing fees, concession fees, rental fees. Do you see the current timetable, or do you endorse the current timetable staying in place?
I don't think the coronavirus is really going to change the timetable. As Ted said, these are decades-long projects, and where we're going to be a decade from now, I don't think is dramatically different than it was before. If anything, I think it emphasizes to us, and we have been and will continue to ask airport authorities around the world that we work in more to focus on how we can run the operations more efficiently. Less about the investment. I talked about at United, for example. We're investing even more in Polaris. The kind of capital investments that prepare you for the future, I think, make all the sense in the world. But using the crisis, to quote our former mayor, never let a good crisis go to waste. Using the crisis as a way to get more efficient. Those are the kinds of things we're doing at United, and that we hope our airport partners will do. So that it costs less to run the airport, even though we still run a great airport. It costs less, as opposed to skimping on the capital investments that are going to make the airport, allow the airport to grow and be bigger and better and more efficient in the decades to come. So I don't think it really changes projects like the O'Hare modernization project.
One last question regarding O'Hare is, today roughly 80% of the traffic O'Hare is dominated by United and American. If we were to look 5 to 10 years down the road, do you see there being more competition at O'Hare? Southwest is starting service this month. Will there be more diversification of air traffic, and do you see that as any competitive pressure on United?
Well, look, first, O'Hare has, for large airports anywhere in the world, probably the most competition of any airport in the world. You look at DFW, American by themselves is probably 85% of the operations. In Charlotte, they're 90%. In Atlanta, Delta is 80+% alone. And, the reality is the aviation business is incredibly complex, or incredibly competitive. Regardless of how many airlines are flying at any airport. The pricing in Atlanta, the pricing here in Dallas is incredibly competitive, because we're all these big airports. We're carrying people that are connecting. So we're carrying people from London to El Paso, and they can connect in Chicago, or they can connect in Dallas, or they can connect in Atlanta. And so much of the traffic flow is about the connecting, that airline pricing stays competitive no matter what. I will tell you that one disadvantage that Chicago has is being a more diverse airport. And the reason is because high connectivity allows you to fly to more destinations. If you look at Chicago, its size as a city compared to other cities' sizes, and the amount of international flying that they have, Chicago has fewer nonstop destinations. And the reason is because the more people that you can funnel through an airport, more destinations, the bigger you are, you all of a sudden be able to add. Our international flights at United out of Chicago typically have, as many as 70% of the people on board the airplane are not going to and from Chicago. They're connecting from Omaha, Des Moines, Colorado Springs, all over the country. And the bigger a single airline gets at an airport, the more connectivity they have, the more nonstop service that they can grow. So, I think a lot of times the size of hubs is interpreted as a bad thing. But if you look at communities like Dallas, or a place like Charlotte or Atlanta, they over-index on corporations in those companies, and the economies are much stronger because they have really big, strong hubs. Or United's presence in Denver, United's presence in Houston. And Chicago, in some ways gets a little less of that benefit because it's more diverse.
Great. So just to follow up on the issue of carbon emissions in the airline industries, and your personal commitment to lower emissions from aircraft. Member Andy Christoda notes that Airbus is planning a hydrogen-powered plane. And is this part of your vision at United in the future? I know that you mentioned some other technologies were maybe impractical, but what about the hydrogen-powered planes?
Yeah, so hydrogen power is more practical than battery for, the real issue for powering aircraft is energy density. Mm-hmm. And hydrogen takes 3 times as much hydrogen to produce the same amount of energy as jet fuel does. And, that makes it prohibitive to be able to fly a large airplane a long way. You could fly a short-haul aircraft with not many people on it, with either electric or with hydrogen. And I think if you look at what Airbus is doing, they're talking about small, short-haul airplanes. But to be able to fly from Chicago to Los Angeles, or from Chicago to Tokyo, it just, the physics doesn't work. When you need to have 3 times as much weight of hydrogen, liquid hydrogen on board as you do liquid fuel, you just wouldn't be able to carry any passengers that amount of distance. So I suspect that in the years to come there'll be some opportunities for electric and hydrogen short haul. One of the most obvious to me is replacing helicopters, and there's some reasons why it can be more safe than a helicopter. I think it's more likely that the kind of traditional helicopter missions get replaced with either electric or hydropower than what you think of as a typical airline, passenger airline mission.
So your comments about eliminating change fees clearly resonated with our members. And I have a question here from Mark Wegener, who said, he loves it, and he's wondering, will there be a point where you reimpose change fees?
We went out of our way to say it's permanent, and we're not going to. And look, I'll talk broadly about it. It's the number one thing that our customers complain to me about, particularly our frequent traveling customers have complained to me about in the past year. And more broadly, I think it was a cancer on the customer service culture. Because, if we have employees who've spent 30, 35 years and they've had to look at customers who had a really legitimate reason for needing to change their flight and said, thank you, ma'am, thank you, sir, we appreciate your business, but I got to charge you $200. They didn't think it was right. They knew it wasn't right. It didn't feel fair. It didn't feel right, and we forced them into that position. And any of us, including myself, would have become jaded having to have those conversations, having to tell a customer, here's what I have to do, and I know it's not right. It's inconsistent with the do the right thing mantra that we're trying to have. And so this to me was not only about doing the right thing for our customers, it was a down payment, it was a commitment to our employees that we want them to do the right thing for customers, and that it's okay to do the right thing for customers. So this is definitely
great. A couple of questions about United's workforce here in Chicago. Obviously, because of the stress the airline industry is facing overall, United has had to lower its workforce. The question is, do you see that coming back? And when do you see that coming back? And how tied is that to the federal stimulus package that's going through? And as we're on the topic of the stimulus plan, are there any other implications about its passage or lack of passage, or things that are included in the stimulus bill or not, that would have a direct effect on you and the industry?
So I'll start with the stimulus package and first say, I was impressed and thankful for the huge and rapid bipartisan response for CARES 1 back in March, and even CARES 2 before the election, getting those two pieces passed. I think particularly the first avoided what could have easily been a depression in the country without it, and not just because aviation was supported, because it was critical to supporting large parts of the economy. We've got this strange barbell economy that there's, businesses, online businesses, if you're selling home repair goods that are just gangbusters and you can't keep up with demand, and then travel, tourism, entertainment, leisure, your local restaurants that are in the worst depression in their history. And so stimulus has been important to keeping those parts of the economy afloat long enough that we can get through the crisis and get back to supporting the economy. Like if you look at a place like Chicago, we're going to be ready when demand comes back to go back to 100% of what we were doing before, 100% of the flying. And without government support, we wouldn't have been able to keep that infrastructure in place to come back. And that'll be critical to running conventions at the McCormick Center and making sure the hotels downtown are filled and all the restaurants are then filled with all those customers, and the people can go to the shows in downtown Chicago. And so we're a critical enabler for all of that. Looking forward, I personally think that we're looking closer to the end of the year before we can put this sort of in the rearview mirror than the next few months. And we can talk about why if you want. But in that world, we do need more support. We do need stimulus. I would encourage people, if I was when I am talking to them in Washington, to target at the parts of the economy that are really hurting, because everywhere is not, like aviation. But that goal to making sure we're ready to come back when this is over.
Okay. We have time for two more questions. The first is the severity of the pandemic kind of unfolded somewhat gradually. Was there an inflection point where you really determined this is going to be a super serious thing that's going to have a fundamental impact on your industry? And what was that moment?
So I remember the moment. It was the last weekend of February, so earlier than most people thought. On Friday, we were in Los Angeles at a board meeting where we talked about it. It was still in China at that point. It was going to impact it, but we kind of went through a normal, what's our 2020 budget, really a normal board meeting process. And either on that Saturday or Sunday, the last weekend of February, is when it broke out in Italy. And I got our executive team on the phone that day and said, look, and I followed pandemics, the history of pandemics before this. The genie is out of the bottle. This is asymptomatic, long incubation, asymptomatic transfer. The genie is out of the bottle. It's already everywhere in the world, and it's going to be a really big deal. And so the first week of March, we actually went out and we raised $2 billion. And we started the planning to reduce the size of the schedule and And we started, really early and ahead of everyone else. I remember a JP Morgan conference on March 11th where our competitors all got on and basically said, this is not that big a deal. We haven't really seen any impact yet. We were the last presenter and said, we thought demand would be down 70%. And everyone thought we were being a little hysterical. Turned out demand in April was down 98.5%. So we weren't aggressive enough. But because we started early, we would have been more prepared. And really, since the end of March or beginning of April, there have been ups and downs. But we've been pretty accurate about forecasting the course of the pandemic and when we thought it would end and what we thought the trajectory would look like as we went through it. And that's helped us immensely. I also hope and think that we've been pretty accurate at forecasting what the recovery will look like. And really, that's going to be important to, because we're making decisions today that are going to shape where we are 10 years from now. And being accurate about that matters.
Great. One final question. So you have been a senior airline executive through 3 major crises: 9/11, the economic collapse of 2008, and now COVID. What's been your toughest moment over those 3 experiences?
Well, the hardest day for me was October 1st, which is when we furloughed 13,000 employees. We came into the pandemic at United hitting on all cylinders. We had a growth plan in place, felt really good about where we were going and where we were heading. And getting to the point where we had to furlough employees, not to improve our P&L, but just for survival's sake, was certainly the hardest day. It was gratifying to me to hear from employees. I spent a day out at the airport with them and talked to a number of employees who were going to be furloughed. And across the board, the number of people that came up to me and that were positive that said, thank you for everything you're doing. I have confidence in you. And they weren't just talking to me. They said me because they were talking to me. They were talking about the whole team. Confidence in where we're going. This is not your fault. And you're doing all the right things to make sure we're here and coming back for the long term. It actually was emotional for me as well. And here I felt guilty that I had let these people down. And as bad as this was, it was even worse for them as an individual. And yet they were telling me thank you. So that was, in a way, it was the hardest day, but in a way also the most rewarding day to hear that kind of commentary from employees.
One last question just popped up that I've got to ask, which is, did you ever, after going to the Air Force Academy, did you ever get your pilot's license, and do you ever sit in the jump seat?
I didn't. While I was a cadet, I went there thinking I was going to be Tom Cruise and Top Gun. And while you go to the academy, you do basic pilot training. And what I realized is I didn't have the innate sort of sense to be a fighter pilot, and so I wasn't. And I think I was the only person in my graduating class that did not wind up going to pilot training. And while I haven't gotten my pilot's license, I still get the thrill because I can go up into the cockpit and sit in the cockpit with them, of flying into Eagle Vale, which is a great approach, and landing there, flying into LaGuardia at night. And so I still get a little bit of the thrill of flying, but never went to pilot training after.
Great. Well, Scott, thank you very much. I know we all join you with the hope and optimism that the airline and hospitality and tourism industry comes back along with our overall economy. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we wish you all the best moving forward.
Thank you, and I am confident that it's coming back.
Great.